Hello, everyone. This is Reverend Dr. Roger Paul. Let me start the recording of this too. I was going to record it on here, but I can't get this thing out. Here we go. Okay, now we're ready. Let's see. Just got my mouse.
Oh my goodness.
I'm having all kinds of fun here.
That was cool.
Well, I'm hoping Diane will be able to move. Nope, she can't. Okay, hang on, y'all. Give me a second here. I got technical difficulties. Technically, I need help. Well, can y'all see? Uh-oh. Diane's just went blank. Can y'all see everything?
Oh, I see though. You know, I can read it.
Okay, now it's moving. Okay, now you can do it. Sorry, everyone at home. I'm adjusting things still. If this will work. Let's get started. Say a little prayer and we'll get started here. All kinds of issues today. Okay. Father, thank you for this wonderful day and the opportunity to get together and share this wonderful book. Pray that you'll watch over our meeting tonight. Open our hearts and minds that we might learn something and share it with others. We thank you for this opportunity and we give you the praise in your son Michael's name. Jesus of Nazareth. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, section 6, the Andites along the Nile. And I'll start reading. The Andites along the Nile. From the times of the terminal Andite migrations, culture declined in the Euphrates Valley, and the immediate center of civilization shifted to the valley of the Nile. Egypt became the successor of Mesopotamia as the headquarters of the most advanced group on earth. So basically everything shifted as the cultural center from Mesopotamia to the Nile area in Egypt, where the Nile Valley, where the pyramids eventually.
And of course, this was before pyramids were built.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Okay, Millie, would you take the next one?
Mm-hmm. The Nile Valley began to suffer from floods shortly before the Mesopotamian valleys, but fared much better. This early setback was more than compensated by the continuing stream of Andite immigrants, so that the culture of Egypt, though really derived from the Euphrates region, seemed to forge ahead. But in 5000 BC, during the flood period in Mesopotamia, there were 7 distinct groups of human beings in Egypt. All of them, save one, came from Mesopotamia.
Okay, so most of them came from the Mesopotamia area. Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
Yes, sir. When the last Exodus in the Euphrates Valley occurred, Egypt was fortunate in gaining so many of the most skillful artists and artisans. These Andite artisans found themselves quite at home in that they were thoroughly familiar with river life, its floods, irrigation, and dry seasons. They enjoyed the sheltered position of the Nile Valley. They were there much less subject to hostile raids and attacks than along the Euphrates, and they added greatly to the metalworking skill of the Egyptians. Here they worked iron ores coming from Mount Sinai and stored up in the Black Sea regions.
Okay, so it improved the culture of the Egyptians by quite a bit, having the Mesopotamians moving in this area. What else was this about the flood and irrigation that was so important? That was the growing of crops along the rivers, right? They needed the water to survive. So,
Careful.
yeah.
The Egyptians very early assembled their municipal deities into an elaborate national system of gods. They developed an extensive theology and had an equally extensive but burdensome priesthood. Several different leaders sought to revive the remnants of the early religious teachings of the Sethites, but these endeavors were short-lived. The Andites built the first stone structures in Egypt. The first and most exquisite of the stone pyramids was erected by Imhotep,
Yeah.
an Andite architectural genius, while serving as prime minister. Previous buildings had been constructed of brick, and while many stone structures had been erected in different parts of the world, this was the first in Egypt. But the art of building steadily declined from the days of this great architect.
So these great stone pyramids you see in Egypt was due to an Andite, okay? And the skill to build these was from this Andite, okay, that came to Egypt. Isn't that interesting? So all the pyramids you see by all the pharaohs and all this stuff, it was because of this Andite architect that they were possible. Imhotep. This brilliant epic of culture, This brilliant epic of culture was cut short by internal warfare along the Nile, and the country was soon overrun, as Mesopotamia had been, by the inferior tribes from inhospitable Arabia and by the blacks from the south. As a result, social progress steadily declined for more than 500 years. So it's two different influences that brought the culture down. Nellie, would you take this one?
7. Andites of the Mediterranean Isles. During the decline of culture in Mesopotamia, there persisted for some time a superior civilization on the islands of the eastern Mediterranean.
Rodney?
I'm trying to imagine the islands of Eastern Mediterranean, like Sirius and stuff like that. Cyrus,
Yeah, that would be part of it. And any of the islands along the Mediterranean. Yeah.
about 12,000 BC, a brilliant tribe of Andites migrated to Crete. This was the only island settled so early by such a superior group, and it was almost 2,000 years before the descendants of these mariners spread to the neighboring islands. This group were the narrow-headed, smaller statued Andites, who had intermarried with the Van-like division of the northern Nadites. They were all under 6 feet in height and had been literally driven off the mainland by their larger and inferior fellows. These immigrants to Crete were highly skilled in textiles, metals, pottery, plumbing, and the use of stone for building material. They engaged in writing and carried on as herders and agriculturists.
And what was Crete? Crete was part of the original garden, right?
No.
Okay. So that's interesting too.
Almost 2,000 years after the settlement of Crete, a group of the tall descendants of Adamson made their way over the northern islands to Greece, coming almost directly from their highland home north of Mesopotamia. These progenitors of the Greeks were led westward by Sato, a direct descendant of Adamson and Laban.
I love it how they kept track of all these things. The group which finally settled in Greece consisted of 375 of the selected and superior people comprising the end of the second civilization of the Adamsonites. These later sons of Adamson carried the then most valuable strains of the emerging white races. They were a high intellectual order and they physically regarded the most beautiful men of the days of the first Eden. So this is some of the origins of the white races too. All right. Millie.
Presently, Greece and the Aegean Islands region succeeded Mesopotamia and Egypt as the occidental center of trade, art, and culture. But as it was in Egypt, so again, practically all of the art and science of the Aegean world was derived from Mesopotamia, except for the culture of the Adamsonite forerunners of the Greeks. All the art and genius of these latter people is a direct legacy of the posterity of Adamson, the first son of Adam and Eve, and his extraordinary second wife, a daughter descended in an unbroken line from the pure Nodite staff of Prince Caragastia. No wonder the Greeks had mythological traditions that they were directly descended from gods and superhuman beings.
Remember Adam and Eve and their children would seem like superhuman to the Adam people. Rodney?
The Aegean region passed through 5 distinct cultural stages, each less spiritual than the preceding. Then Pirlo, the last glorious world cult first, beneath the weight of the rapidly multiplying mediocre descendants of the
Nubian slaves, that's right.
slaves, who had been imported by the later generations of Greeks.
It was during this age in Crete that the mother cult of the descendants of Cain attained its greatest vogue. This cult glorified Eve in the worship of the Great Mother. Images of Eve were everywhere. Thousands of public shrines were erected throughout Crete and Asia Minor, and this mother cult persisted on down to the times of Christ, becoming later incorporated in the early Christian religion under the guise of the glorification and worship of Mary, the Earth Mother of Jesus.
So that's where there was so much interest in the Mary, the mother of Jesus, in the Catholic Church, right?
Interesting, right?
Yeah. Interesting how this stuff comes about. By about 65,000 BC, there had occurred a great decline in the spiritual heritage of the Andites.
Roger,
Yeah,
6,500. I'm sorry,
6,500 BC. What did I say?
65,000.
Oh, did I?
Oh, wow.
Thanks, Rodney, for catching that. By about 6,500 BC, there had occurred a great decline in the spiritual heritage of the Andites. The descendants of Adam were widespreadly dispersed and had been virtually swallowed up in the older and more numerous human races. And this decadence of Andite civilization, together with the disappearance of their religious standards, left the spiritually impoverished races of the world in a deplorable condition.
By 5000 BC, the 3 purest strains of Adam's descendants were in Sumeria, northern Europe, and Greece. The whole of Mesopotamia was being slowly deteriorated by the stream of mixed and darker races which filtered in from Arabia, and the coming of these inferior peoples contributed further to the scattering abroad of the biologic and cultural residue of the Andites. From all over the Fertile Crescent, the more adventurous peoples poured westward to the islands. These migrants cultivated both grain and vegetables, and they brought domesticated animals with them.
Rodney.
About 5000 BC, a mighty host of progressive Mesopotamians moved out of the Euphrates Valley and settled upon the island of Cyprus. This civilization was wiped out about 2,000 years subsequently by the barbarian hordes from the north.
Well, that poor island went through a lot, didn't it?
Another great colony settled on the Mediterranean near the latter side of Carthage. And from North Africa, large numbers of Andites entered Spain and later mingled in Switzerland with their brethren who had earlier come to Italy from the Aegean Islands.
When Egypt followed Mesopotamia in cultural decline, many of the more able and advanced families fled to Crete, thus greatly augmenting this already advanced civilization. And when the arrival of inferior groups from Egypt later threatened the civilization of Crete, the more cultured families moved to west to Greece. Edie?
The Greeks were not only great teachers and artists, they were also the world's greatest traders and colonizers. Before succumbing to the flood of inferiority, which eventually engulfed their art and commerce, they succeeded in planting so many outposts of culture to the west that was a great many of the advances in early Greek civilization persisted in the later peoples of southern Europe, and many of the mixed descendants of these Andinites became incorporated in the tribes of the adjacent mainland. Adamsonites, descendants of these Adamsonites, became incorporated in the tribes of the adjacent mainlands. There's not enough punctuation in that.
There's not.
They need more commas and periods.
Really? Rodney?
Hey, is that Danubian?
Danubian, yeah, Andinites.
Hey, that Danubian Andalite. The Andite peoples of the Euphrates Valley migrated north to Europe to mingle with the Blue Man, and west into the Mediterranean regions to mix with the remnants of the commingled Saharans and the Southern Blue Man. And these two branches of the white race were, and now are, widely separated by the broad-headed mountain survivors of the earlier Andinite tribes, which have long inhabited these central regions.
It's interesting how they determine people by their head shape.
Bigger brains, smaller brains, I don't know.
Yeah.
These descendants of Andon were dispersed through most of the mountainous regions of Central and Southeastern Europe. They were often reinforced by arrivals from Asia Minor, which region they occupied in considerable strength. The ancient Hittites stemmed directly from the Andinite stock. Their pale skins and broad heads were typical of that race. This strain was carried in Abraham's ancestry and contributed much to the characteristic facial appearance of his latter Jewish descendants, who, while having a culture and religion derived from the Andites, spoke a very different language. Their tongue was distinctly Andinite.
Okay, the tribes that dwelt in houses erect on piles or log piers over the lakes of Italy, Switzerland, and southern Europe were the expanding fringes of the African, Asian, and especially the Danubian migrations.
Why would they build their houses up on piers over the water? Why don't they just build them on the land?
So they'd have access to fish and things like that, a constant food supply, really, of the lakes and that sort of thing. And also much much travel was done across lakes and streams and things like that, because that was their only type of travel besides horseback.
The Danubians were Andinites, farmers and herders who had entered Europe through the Balkan Peninsula and were moving slowly northward by way of the Danube Valley. They made pottery and tilled the land, preferring to live in the valleys. The most northerly settlement of the Danubians was at Liège in Belgium. These tribes deteriorated rapidly as they moved away from the center and source of their culture. The best pottery is the product of the earlier settlements.
They, the Danubians, became mother worshippers as a result of the work of the missionaries from Crete. These tribes later amalgamated with groups of Andite sailors who came by boats from the coast of Asia Minor and who were also mother worshippers. Much of Central Europe was thus early settled by these mixed types of the broad-headed white races which practiced mother worship and the religious rite of cremating the dead, for it was the custom of the mother cultists to burn their dead in stone huts.
Interesting. Cremation, right?
9. The three white races. The racial blends in Europe towards the close of the Andite migrations became generalized into the three white races as follows.
Can you take the first one?
1. The northern white race. The so-called Nordic race consisted primarily of the blue man plus the Andite, but also contained a considerable amount of Andinite blood, together with smaller amounts of the red and yellow Sangat. The northern white race thus encompassed these four most desirable human stocks, but the largest inheritance was from the blue man. The typical early Nordic was long-headed, tall, and blond, but long ago this race became thoroughly mixed with all other branches of the white peoples.
Swedes. They look like the Swedes. That's right. The primitive culture of Europe, which was encountered by the invading Nordics, was that of the retrograding Danubian blended with the blue men. The Nordic, Danish, and the Danubian Andite cultures met and mingled on the Rhine as is witnessed by the existence of two racial groups in Germany today.
I did not know there were two racial groups in Germany today.
I guess there are. I didn't either.
Well, today was 100 years ago.
Yeah, it was 1934, 35.
What about the start of between World War I and II?
Yeah. Right.
Two racial groups. That doesn't connect with anything in my head. Anyway,
Maybe the Jews were,
maybe what?
the Jews were considered good. You know what I mean?
Possibly.
I don't know.
The Nordics continued the trade in amber from the Baltic coast, building up a great commerce with the broad heads of the Danube Valley via the Brunner Pass. This extended contact with the Danubians led these northerners into the mother worship, and for several thousands of years, cremation of the dead was almost universal throughout Scandinavia. This explains why remains of the earlier white races, although buried all over Europe, are not to be found, only their ashes in stone and clay urns. These white men also built dwellings. They never lived in caves. And again, this explains why there are so few evidences of the white man's early culture, although the preceding Cro-Magnon type is well preserved, where it had been securely sealed up in caves and grottos. As it were, one day in northern Europe, there is a primitive culture of the retrogressing Danubians and the blue man, and the next, that of suddenly appearing and vastly superior white man.
Interesting. Okay. Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
Number
2.
2, you didn't change the slide on the anything.
Sorry.
It's okay. Oh, that was you, Diane.
Yes, it was.
With the central white race. This group includes strains of blue, yellow, and andite, but is predominantly Andite. These people are broad-headed, swarthy, and stocky. They are driven like a wedge between the Nordic and Mediterranean races, with the broad base resting in Asia and apex penetrating states west.
For almost 20,000 years, the Andinites had been pushed farther and farther to the north of Central Asia by the Andites. By 3000 BC, increasing aridity was driving these Andinites back into Turkestan. This Andinite push southward continued for over 1,000 years and splitting around the Caspian and Black Seas, penetrated Europe by way of both the Balkans and the Ukraine. This invasion included the remaining groups of Adamson's descendants, and during the latter half of the invasion period carried with it considerable numbers of the Iranian Andites, as well as many of the descendants of the Sethite priests.
Can we back up one paragraph?
Sure.
We talked about driven like a wedge between the Nordic and Mediterranean races, with the broad base resting in Asia and the apex penetrating eastern France. Does that sound like the Basque? The Basque are on the south edge of eastern France into Spain, between Spain and France on the eastern coast.
Yeah.
No, the western coast. The natives are on the western coast. The Basques are up in that area,
Right.
and they are stocky, well built.
Yeah. And it was, what they're talking about, this wedge is kind of a wedge of people in an area, you know? That's what they're talking about.
Well, the Basques are very different people from either the Spaniards or the French.
Right.
They live in that area in between them, but they're not like either one of them.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Who's that? Me? You just read it?
Diane,
I'm up now.
Okay.
I thought it was real good. I did.
You did, it's me? Okay. By 2500 BC, the westward thrust of the Andinites reached Europe. And this overrunning of all Mesopotamia, Asia Minor, and the Danube Basin by the barbarians of the hills of Turkestan constituted the most serious and lasting of all cultural setbacks up to that time. These invaders definitely Andinized the character of the Central European races, which have ever since remained characteristically Alpine.
what does it mean that they're characteristically Alpine?
They resemble more the Alpine people, the people living in the Alpine regions, in the mountains.
I'm getting very confused. This is all going too fast.
Oh, it's a lot of racial mixtures. What the whole point of this is we make some steps forward and then we go steps backwards.
I think of the Alpine as being the Yodelers and the ones with the long horns that they communicate about the mountain
as
tops.
opposed to the Nordics. Now the Nordics being more along the Viking, Voyagers and that sort of thing.
I do know that the Nords and Danes, when they were invading other places and they had ships and whatnot, and they would go out and conquer other areas, they built ships for their dead. They put the dead warriors on a ship and set it on fire and pushed it out into the water.
Yeah.
They didn't burn their dead, even though today there are burial mounds throughout the Nordic countries.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what's under those burial mounds.
Yeah, really. Well, it's interesting that the invaders came from Turkey, the Turkestans. Okay, this is the northern area up above the Mesopotamia area. So, what you have is invaders that are more barbaric going up and mixing with the cultures that were progressing along, and that retards that culture. It's kind of like Genghis Khan when he came down, and conquered most of the world. They were more barbaric, so their culture overran the existing cultures that were there and took that down too. So it's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Willie, would you take the next one, please? 3.
Oh, me?
Yeah, please.
The southern white race. This brunette Mediterranean race consisted of a blend of the Andite and the Blue Man, with a smaller Andite strain than in the north. This group also absorbed a considerable amount of secondary Sangit blood through the Saharans. In later times, this southern division of the white race was infused by strong Andite elements from the eastern Mediterranean.
Boy, they could have pretty much put all these programs. We all mixed together.
We're working on it.
Yeah, pretty much.
And for them to keep track of all this,
Yeah, well, it's comes back to the midwayers don't forget. They remember everything that's happening.
But it is an overview.
Yeah, it is an overview. Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
please, yes. The Mediterranean coastlines did not, however, become permeated by the Andites until the times of the great nomadic invasions of 2500 BC. Land traffic and trade were nearly suspended during these centuries when nomads invaded the eastern Mediterranean district. This interference with land travel brought about the great expansion of sea traffic and trade. Mediterranean seaborne commerce was in full swing about 4,500 years ago, and this development of marine traffic resulted in the sudden expansion of the descendants of the Andites throughout the entire coastal territory of the Mediterranean basin.
Okay, remember the Saharas had a pathway, a silk pathway that went across
Right?
the Saharas, right? And this was interrupted, all of a sudden it disappeared. They see all these civilizations they discovered that just disappeared. And this is why these civilizations disappeared, is because the nomads, and the Turkish people, the Turkish horsemen came down from Turkestan and invaded these passing groups that were trying to trade all the way across to the Mediterranean Valley. So what happened was the trade started going around the seas, the Mediterranean seas, because it wasn't safe to go across the Saharas any longer.
Yes.
Alright. And they have shows on this on TV all the time of what's the big mystery. They think it's a big mystery what happened to these civilizations along the Sahara Desert. And that's what it was. Okay?
These racial mixtures laid the foundation for the Southern European race, the most highly mixed of all. And since these days, this race has undergone still further admixture, notably with the blue-yellow Andite peoples of Arabia. This Mediterranean race is in fact so freely admixed with the surrounding peoples as to be virtually indiscernible as a separate type, but in general its members are short, long-headed, and brunette.
Track everything. In the north, the Andites, through warfare and marriage, obliterated the Blue Man. And in the south, they survived in greater numbers. The Basques and the Berbers represented the survivor of the two branches of this race. But even these peoples have been thoroughly mixed with the Saharans.
Now, I don't know about the Berbers. Where were they?
No, I'm not sure about them either, really. That's, I'd have to look that one up. And the other group, I know nothing about, so.
This is the first time I've heard them speak of the Basque, and I know that they are between France and Spain.
Yeah,
They're very different people,
yeah.
very proud people. Oh, what is this me?
Yeah, this is you.
This was the picture of race mixture presented in Central Europe about 3000 BC. In spite of the partial Edenic default, the higher types did blend.
That's the whole point of all this, right? Rodney?
Okay, these were the times of the new Stone Age, overlapping the oncoming Bronze Age. In Scandinavia, it was the Bronze Age associated with mother worship. In southern France and Spain, it was the New Stone Age associated with the sun worship. This was the time of the building of the circular and roofless sun temples. The European white races were energetic builders, alighting to set up great stones as tokens to the sun, much as did their later-day descendants at Stonehenge. The vogue of sun worship indicates that this was a great period of agriculture in southern Europe.
Okay, so the Bronze Age was associated with mother worship, and that's why there's bronze statues they find everywhere of female
Water maidens.
maidens, things like that, because of the mother worship. The Stone Age was associated with the sun worship, and that's where Stonehenge, and there's several other circles. We just watched a program the other night about this in England, that they would set up these great stones, and sometimes they'd tear them down and build something else on top of them. Okay, there's one over there now. Stonehenge just happened to survive, and that was for sun worshipers, right? And in the Stone Age, they would carve indications of their sun worship in stone instead of like in bronze, because that was the age of that period of time. So anything that would be dug up was because of that.
The superstitions of this comparatively recent sun-worshipping era even now persist in folkways of Brittany. Although Christianized for over 1,500 years, these Bretons still retain charms of the New Stone Age for warding off the evil eye. They still keep thunderstones in the chimney as protection against lightning. The Bretons never The Britons never mingled with the Scandinavian Nordics. They are survivors of the original Andite inhabitants of Western Europe, mixed with the Mediterranean stock.
Isn't that interesting? So the English basically are a mixture of the Andinites and the Mediterranean people, not the Nordics, not the Vikings, which is kind of interesting.
So the Britons, right?
Yeah, the Britons.
They're not British, they're Britons.
Britons, that's right.
They're different than just saying British people, they're Britons from Brittany.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. They're from that continent, in other words, right? Which is different from being British, right? Okay. But it is a fallacy to presume to classify the white peoples as Nordic, Alpine, and Mediterranean. There has been altogether too much blending to permit such a grouping. At one time there was a fairly well-defined division of the white race into such classes, but widespread intermingling has since occurred, and it's no longer possible to identify these distinctions with any clarity. Even in 3000 BC, the ancient social groups were no more of one race than they are in the present inhabitants of North America. 1957.
This European culture for 5,000 years continued to grow and to some extent intermingle, but the barrier of language prevented the full reciprocation of the various Occidental nations. During the past century, this culture has been experiencing its best opportunity for blending in the cosmopolitan population of North America, and the future of that continent will be determined by the quality of the racial factors which are permitted to enter into its present and future populations, as well as by the level of the social culture which is maintained.
Okay,
It's
you
also
wonder.
presented by an archangel of Medidon.
Okay, you wonder why the Urantia book was brought to America, not China or some other country, right? This is the answer right here. Because North America, or America, is the most blended stock of people in the world, okay? So that's why they started it in North America, so it could get the greatest influence of the various types of people. And it is our responsibility to have translations made of the Urantia book for all types of people that aren't blended, as much. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Next time we'll do paper 81, the development of the modern civilization. Okay? And let's say a prayer and we'll quit for tonight.
Yeah, oh, modern civilization.
Modern civilization. Yeah.
What do they call modern civilization?
From
Something after 3000 BC?
yeah, after 3,000. It's more like the last couple hundred years, probably. Last 1,000 years, more likely. I'm not sure. Billy, would you like to close us in prayer tonight?
Yes, thank you. Heavenly Father, we thank you for allowing us this time tonight, for clearing our schedules and our calendars so that we could meet one more time to discuss this very confusing book. We need to have a group together so that we can put out the questions and get answers from different viewpoints. It's very difficult to study the book by oneself. We thank you for this group. It's very important to us. It's critical to our understanding of your message, and we thank you for that. We thank you for Roger, for Diane, for Rodney, for Tim when he shows up. We thank you for letting us get together and dissect your word. Help keep us on track so that we understand what it is you want us to, we do understand what it is you want us to understand. We thank you for this. We thank you for your Son, Christ Michael, Jesus of Babylon. Amen.
Amen. And thank you for joining us at home. Please come see us again. Next week, development of modern civilization, paper 81.
What